So, let's take a look back into history. WebSphere used to be pretty much completely unsecured out of the box, and it was left to the customers to secure it. Then all of a sudden, we decided to turn security on and have some level of security out of the box. Can you explain what was happening, what was going on, and why this decision was made?
Yeah, so I guess there's really two factors that kind of led to this change. One, of course, is product maturity. Usually when products are sort of early in their life cycle, people are more focused on feature function type things. But as time goes on, there tends to be more demand for more sophistication and more of non-functional requirements. And the key one is security. So as time has gone on, people just expect better security from the product. And secondly, in parallel to this, the reality is the world in which WebSphere operates has changed over its lifetime. I mean, the sensitivity of both users of WebSphere to security issues as well as the reality of the number of attacks out there has been increasing so rapidly that it just seemed sort of obvious that we needed to have a better security posture out of the box. Now, one thing I do want to make clear is that the product has actually always had a very good security infrastructure in the sense that you could build a very secure environment, really going way back to WebSphere version 3. But the big change we made in 6.1 and actually are continuing with 7 and future releases was to try to meet this sort of principle which is called secure by default. The idea is that a naive but still competent person installs the product for the first time and does sort of the initial configuration. And our goal was to make it as secure as we could by default. So without your having to go out of your way and say, oh, I have to do all these secondary things to make it more secure, just have it be that way by default. And you see the exact same phenomenon in operating systems like both Windows and Linux. Modern versions of these operating systems are far more secure by default than versions from just 5 years ago. And we felt, the same should be true for WebSphere, so that was one of our big goals. And, I don't think we've quite achieved that goal in every possible area, but with each release it gets better and better. And I'm actually really pleased with how many of the functionalities of WebSphere are actually very secure by default out of the box. I'm really happy about that.
Great. Keith, getting into, you just mentioned that you're really pleased, about this area. Along that line, what would you say your proudest moment regarding WebSphere security was?
That's an interesting question and actually kind of challenging. I don't know that I have one. I think I probably have three. One I just told you, which is the secure by default. I'm proud of that, A, because I think it was very important, and B, I actually was behind some of those changes. I can't take credit for the actual development effort. Our great developers did the work, but I was the one pushing for it. So that to me was a big thing. But there's two other areas that I'm actually really pleased about in WebSphere that have come up over the last few years. One was in the 5.1 time frame, we made a lot of effort to make the infrastructure more pluggable, more customizable. So if you take a look at papers I've written on advanced authentication as well as the Info Center documentation on custom TAIs and custom login modules, you will find that you can pretty much make WebSphere integrate with anything if you're willing to try hard enough. So we have lots of highly customizable plug points that makes it possible for us to fit into environments that don't match exactly what we expect. WebSphere sort of naively expects, you've got an LDAP server and a fairly simple scenario, but with customization, we can make really any reasonable thing work, and I'm very proud of that. The other item that I'm very pleased about is that in 6.0 and 6.1, we've actually been doing a lot of work from a performance perspective in the security runtime. And the real goal behind this is really very simple. I don't want people to say security costs too much, so I don't want to use it. It's going to hurt my performance. So we've done a great deal of work in 6.0 and even more in 6.1 and still more in 7 to try to really lower the overhead of even enabling security. And we've gotten it down to the point now where I would argue for most reasonable environments, the overhead of security is within the measurement error of most typical systems. It's not to say the cost of security is free, but my experience with most customers is that the overhead costs are really low enough now that there's really no reason not to use it, as opposed to back in the day, people might say, that's too expensive, but now I just don't think that's really viable anymore.
Yeah, it's really interesting to hear that a lot of customers may be making that analysis on something as important as security.
Yeah, I actually have often been worried about that as well, and I frankly have been surprised by people sort of a priori saying security is too expensive. And now I think we're in a better place where not only do we actually have data to back up our statement that it really isn't that expensive, and there were some areas where we did identify some problems, and again, we did a lot of work to make it much more efficient. So today, I just don't think the numbers are, I don't think the numbers support the decision not to use security. I don't think you can make that decision anymore rationally.
Well, that's great, and I'm glad we covered that, and I think that goes along to what we had found, and as we opened up this interview and this series about how sometimes people just sort of put it on the back burner, and I could certainly, speaking for myself, I have learned a lot, and I feel a lot smarter now about security. Keith, I know you're really busy, but and before we close in this interview, why don't you just, if you can, just share with us maybe some future statements, what you would like the listeners to take away, et cetera, from this session.
Sure. A few random thoughts. Obviously, per IBM policy, I can't make commitments about future product plans, but I can definitely tell you that we're very conscious of security and the importance of it in the product, and it will continue to be a very important aspect of our product. I actually think it's a very critical element of any system building, and I've actually seen some other tools and frameworks out there that I think really ignore the problem of security, and I think that's rather foolhardy of them. So we're very conscious of the importance of security, and we continue to improve it. So in future releases, you'll continue to see improvements in the area of performance. We're going to continue to improve our hardening posture, trying to, again, do more things by default as we learn more, as sort of industry best practice evolves, things like that. And then, of course, the third element of security, which is probably self-evident, but it's always worth mentioning, we'll continue to track standards, continue to upgrade the product to support new standards as they emerge and become relevant to our customers. It's sort of an ongoing process. The only other thing I might add, which isn't really WebSphere specific, but just a more general point, is building secure systems requires a conscious decision to do it, and building systems securely does tend to impact system architecture. So one thing I always tell people is you need to start with security as one of your key initial requirements from day one as you build the system. There's nothing more frustrating to me than going to work with someone who has already built a system and said, okay, it's all done, now I just need to sprinkle security over this and my problem will be solved. The problem is that sometimes it can be extraordinarily difficult to retrofit security on top of an application that wasn't designed to be secure. And I've actually had some fairly painful scenarios involving that. So I always tell people, design for security from day one, implement security from day one, buy products that provide good security from day one, et cetera, and you'll generally be pleased with the results. But if you defer it till too late, things can get very unpleasant.
Well, I could, certainly agree and vouch for that. And Keith, this has been extremely insightful, and I hope our listeners have enjoyed this. I thank you again, and I really appreciate you joining in this interview.
Well, I was glad to do it. It was actually kind of fun, and get to hear my voice recorded on the Internet. This will be kind of an exciting experience.
Well, fantastic. Well, there you have it, everyone. Keith Botham with IBM WebSphere Security. And this is your host, Stephen Collo, and I look forward to our next topic.